All right, so let's dive into our final character archetype of our semester. We spent the first portion of our class for several weeks kind of focusing on large narrative ideas, right? Hero's journey, big arc, ultimate goals, things like that, beginnings to endings, you might say. We spent the last several weeks focusing on the more character-focused ideas. The last month or so, we're going to go back to the stories so we can sort of take a synthesis of the two now that we know the overall journey, the overall arc of narrative, combined with these specific character elements. Now we'll see how they play out in the final couple weeks. All right, so we'll get back to more story-focused ideas in the coming days. Tonight, the last one, hopefully you were able to tell this has to do with the king. I told you that was going to be from our book title, but also hopefully from some of the people that you were looking at, you were able to figure it out as well. The king, according to Moore and Gillette, is a bit of a synthesis of all of the three other archetypes. It's weird. In their book, they actually highlight the king first and then go into the other three, which I think is odd and why I didn't do it that way, because it seems like you should go to the other pieces first and then end up with this one, because this is the ultimate archetype that we want to land on. So not always does the king exhibit the other three. Doesn't mean every king is also a warrior, doesn't mean every king is also, has some special intelligence and power. A lot of times that is the case, and so I've separated it out, but we want to kind of think of how this archetype is the ultimate, because really, as I mentioned in the prep notes, this is the archetype that is truly in a leadership position. Warrior doesn't always have to be. The other two certainly don't have to be all the time. This one, if you're in charge of other people, you better have your stuff together, and you better have several aspects of your personality all organized properly, right? Otherwise, you don't really have the right to be in charge of other people. So this is the character who has gained the wisdom, the self-knowledge of knowing who they are through experience, so that they can then influence other people properly. So let's just dive into what this character tends to look like. We've been highlighting how these ideas are all part of our nature. This is already inside us. It's just up to us through our maturity and proper guidance of others and learning from our experiences that we develop properly. And so this natural element to us is that we're all created in the image of God. And the problem we have as humans, because we're sinful, fallen creatures, we don't always act that way. Our job as we mature, learn of not only Christ, but our proper relationship to God, we learn how to behave as He wants us to. And as you'll see, that is in a kingly fashion, all right? Or queenly if we're talking about females, it's fine. Same difference. All right, so this is who we are. We're naturally this way. It's now just us. It's up to us to live up to that calling. All right. So you might think of prominent characters from both the real world as well as the fictional world. From mythology, Marduk. From biblical stories, King Solomon, Moses. Even though Moses wasn't a king, he was a leader of people. You don't have to necessarily be a king, but you're just a high status leader. In America, I think George Washington is sort of the ultimate figure, because he could have declared himself king. He relinquished power, even though he didn't really have to, which is quite a cool thing to do. The ultimate in humility. And I think what's so great about Washington for us as Americans, if we look to our ultimate role models, so to speak, Washington was a guy who didn't want not that he was afraid of it. We'll talk about people who don't want it really, but he didn't feel like he should have been in such a position of power. Not that he didn't deserve it. He was certainly worthy of it. He just felt like, I'm not going to nominate myself for this duty. And I think that is a great quality of a leader. I'm always very skeptical of people I won't name certain politicians, but you can fill in the blanks. People who run for president over and over and over again, it's like, dude, who are you doing this for? Like, take a hint. They didn't want you, right? You're seeking power. George Washington did not. He had to run because that was the process in place, but he was put forth by other people. Everyone else around him said, you're the best guy. You do it. And he's like, all right, if you guys all think I'm the most appropriate leader, then I guess I'll do it. And then again, he served his 2 terms and said, okay, I'm done. Someone else can take a turn now. So someone who is not so eager to be in charge of people, always be very leery of people who want to be the boss of everything. That's a scary person. That's why I think Washington's so great. Again, not that these people are perfect. Clearly he wasn't. He was a human being. But as a leader of a nation, that's the kind of leader you want. Someone who's moral, who is steadfast and calm, and can get other people to be in order to accomplish goals. And there was no one better than George Washington. In Britain, Queen Victoria was probably one of the better monarchs of England. She expanded the empire. Whether you might want to, whether you think that's good or bad, but I mean, she was a good person. She was very highly respected. In literature, Odysseus, of course, though when I think of Odysseus, I don't usually think of him as a king because he was a warrior first, but he was going home to be king. King Arthur, again, not a perfect character, but highly respected in the mythology of early Britain. Aslan, of course, and then Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. That's why I had you watch that final clip, as we'll show here in a second. He portrays in that one scene the 2 vital elements of what the king archetype exemplifies. Interestingly, the book doesn't really play that scene out. This is I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I know that's probably like heresy here at this university, but I'm not a fantasy person, so I mostly don't care that much. But that final scene in the film is truly a great image that is actually better than how the book presents it. So it's kind of interesting to think about. It's tough to find really good kings because most literature is about bad kings. And so it's a lot easier to find people in power who are not good, which we'll touch on here momentarily, than people who really were good. And so sort of the purpose of literature is to point out the flaws of humans usually. And so it's a lot easier actually to find them than really good kings. So my list for the good kings was, it took my brain a little while to come up with some of those. So what does the king archetype do? Well, first and foremost, the king archetype brings order, but not a stifling order, not a dominant order that inhibits people. It allows for creativity. And as I said, this is often the synthesis of the other archetypes. So, this is, again, someone who can step into a chaotic situation, bring it unto order, yet allow for the situation to continue developing as needed. Not that you come in and have all of the answers and everything has to be done your way. You bring the structure, but then you still allow flexibility because that's how we all have to adapt and grow. So you can't stifle it. And we discussed how the other 3 archetypes really demonstrate what the goal of life is. The goal of life in the warrior is to protect, is to try to keep things safe when needed. The goal of the lover archetype is to enjoy life. The goal of the magician archetype is to understand it intellectually. This is to live out how life is intended to be lived. And for us as Christians, how God intended it to be lived. So this is, the ultimate aspect of who we are. Combine the physical, the mental, and emotional, and this is what you get. All right, so as always, we want to look at both sides of this character. Acting in fullness, as Moore and Gillette describe it. Like I said, this is the person who brings order to whatever situation they enter. Taking the world from chaos to peace and organization. So again, if God is our ultimate model, taking the chaos of the beginnings of the universe, whatever that looked like, and bringing things to order, this is, in our tiny human way, what we're also trying to do in our own lives. Take the mess that goes on and make everything make sense so that there's stability, yet still freedom to grow and learn like we definitely need to. So this is where wisdom is. It's you can't really be young and be a king properly. You don't know enough yet. So it takes, most of these characters they've been around, they've had a wide variety of experiences. And the use of language is super important for the king because, perhaps the king isn't the one on the battlefield making people submit to his will. This is a person who might have to speak truth in order to calm things down, to bring things under order. So the use of language for the king and expressing proper wisdom is vital for this character. This is the character who transmits the law. This is why, here in America, we are not like England was and frankly still is, which is that kings and queens are perceived to have been brought forth by God, like you've been ordained or destined to be the king of England, so to speak. We don't really follow that here. But you can see what the representation of the king or queen is for the British people. It's the structure that has been passed down from generations, as if from God himself, to keep things in order. And as I said, embodies it for others. You're the representative of the people. And so even though Britain has a monarchy where they elect people and they have a prime minister and they have parliament and all that stuff where they have elected officials, the figurehead is still supposedly the embodiment of the people. That's why usually the people love the queen or the princess or whoever it might be so much, is because, even though you're not the one necessarily making rules or declaring war or, things that like our president might do, you are the manifestation of something that has been brought to fulfillment. Okay, leadership fulfilled. So there's this divine element that's part of it. And it's also, I put divine law in here because it's not always exactly that this person in leadership is writing laws or creating laws, again, to tell people what to do. A true king looks beyond the sort of the legalism, the day-to-day practical law, and aims at a higher law. And this is where the divine element comes in, which is, do I not go punch people in the face because that would be breaking the law? No, I don't go punch people in the face because that would be breaking a divine law. That there's something about your humanity I need to be respecting as a creature of God, as a person and not another animal, whatever it might be. There's a higher law that we follow, and the king helps to transmit that. So in some cases, yes, the leader has to make actual rules and actual laws. But what the king, as the archetype, does is demonstrate what the laws should be, the higher laws, as if God himself ordained them. And again, acts them out. The king is supposed to be the ultimate model for how we should be behaving, which is the next thing. So you're the living representation. If you're going to tell us what to do, you better be doing it yourself. In fact, you better be doing it better than all of us, because you're the one we're all watching. You're the one in charge. We've declared you to be the best person, and so you better get it right. So this is why we get so upset when we see people in power who are corrupt. It's like, you're supposed to be the model. You're supposed to be the example for the people to follow. Because if we don't have anyone to follow, what do? Right? That's where things start getting messy. So that's why corruption in government or in any CEO, anyone in a position of power or leadership, you better have your act together, because if you don't, the whole thing could fall apart because you're the role model, right? We also see, if you remember, if you haven't gotten to our humanities class with Oedipus, this appears in a variety of other Greek literature, literary pieces as well. But often, it's the life of the king is symbolized in the land itself or in the people themselves. So remember from Oedipus, remember at the beginning of Oedipus where, there had been corruption in Thebes before, and so there's like drought and people are starving and there's sickness or whatever. Like the whole kingdom and the land itself is harmed because the corruption, it's like being cursed, right? If you're the embodiment of the people in the land and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, everyone gets punished. All right? So, of course, that's the beginning of Oedipus. Oedipus comes in, he's super smart, he solves the riddle, and all of a sudden the city is restored to some sense of stability. Things start improving until he has his own personal problems, right? But again, the Greeks sort of played this out. We don't necessarily see that as often anymore, but where it's as if the person is reflected in the land itself. The leader doesn't do his job, even the land, the natural world, will crumble or start to fall apart a bit. So, of course, as I mentioned with Field of Dreams, the king, or the extension of the father figure, this is where, along with laws, we get customs, traditions. This is where culture comes from, because, again, we need some rules, we need some guidelines of how to live our lives if we're going to keep safe and not destroying each other, right? So that is the first half of acting in fullness from the king archetype. The second is blessing. So this is, again, back to Aragorn, why that final scene is so great. Notice he gets appointed king. Everyone is in awe because, remember, he was the toughest warrior, and now he's sort of rewarded or elevated from that to being not only the ultimate fighter, the ultimate physical guy, the ultimate moral leader. He becomes the king. And notice what he does. The best scene of the whole trilogy is, which is why I have he sees them. He gives credit to the littlest people, right? The hobbits. And even though the people of the kingdom are bowing to him, he recognizes, I should also be bowing to you, even to the smallest of people. Well, like, what better way to get respect from people than when you're in a position of power and you say, no, you're great too. You got people who are devoted to you for life, right? I mean, that's how you win over people in a true way. Not that you're trying to be manipulative or deceitful or, you're trying to trick them or something. When you truly recognize that, yes, I have been placed in a position of authority. Yes, I've had success, and yes, I may be wiser and more successful than other people, but I also recognize other people have helped me get to this point, or who are equally as good a people as I am, they just didn't happen to fall in this position. When you give credit to other people, this is what a proper king also does. Bad kings take all the credit for themselves, right? So this is what Moore and Gillette write. I really like this quote. That's why I just pulled the whole thing. The king looks upon the world with a firm but kindly eye. Typo there. It sees others in all their weakness and in all their talent and worth. It honors and promotes them. It guides them and nurtures them toward their own fullness of being. It's not envious because it is secure as the king in its own worth. It rewards and encourages creativity. So it basically, the king, like a good parent, yes, brings order to whatever group you're leading, but it also says, I see that you're valuable, I see that you can contribute, and I want to give you an opportunity to do that. I'm going to create a space for you to flourish. I'm going to keep you safe. I'm going to keep everything organized, and within that organization, you can pursue what you want, be who you can be, use your talents and who God has made you to be, because you can be great, and I want to see you be great, and I'm going to create that opportunity for you. That's what a proper parent should do. That's what a coach should do. That's what a teacher should do. It's what a CEO should do. It's what a president of a college should do. It's what the president of the country should do. Whoever. Yeah, you're in charge, but your job to be in charge is not to boss people around. It's to keep things settled so that the people below you can do amazing things. And then you can give credit for them. And then we can give credit back to them by saying, thank you for giving us this space to be who we can be. And so we reflect the goodness of each other. And that's what a king can provide. So that's the good side, right? As we've been saying, acting in shadow, the tyrant is the opposing side. You could have probably predicted that, particularly based on one of the examples I gave you to look at for today, which we'll talk about here shortly. So, of course, you can, like the warrior, like the others, you can assume what the tyrant does. This is a person who takes advantage of his or her power. And a couple examples that just came to mind. There are many, many more, of course. King Herod and King Saul, these are people who saw the birth of Christ or the expansion of Christianity as being a threat to them, and so they had to lash out and say, "No, you're not going to, take over my power." In literature, almost all of Shakespeare's kings, they're not always tyrants exactly, but they're all massively flawed. Blind spots we've talked about. Richard III is one of the most extreme. He's just a brutal guy who does everything he can to become the king. He murders lots of people because he's so envious of everyone above him that he wants the power. Macbeth and his wife tend to fall into that category too. Again, I highlighted them because they actually commit crimes for what they're pursuing. The other kings, again, they're also not acting properly. Like Lear, he's not an evil guy like some of these characters are, but he's also not a good king either. He's prideful. He demands that people love him how he wants, and that leads to the falling apart of his kingdom, of course, his own selfishness. So this, of course, in our present day, this is any political dictator. This is who they are. They boss people. They demand that you acquiesce to their whims, otherwise you're either imprisoned or killed or excommunicated in some way. You do not allow any alternative views because what you say goes, and that's it. It's like, well, that's being a tyrant, obviously. So these people, you can just guess, these are insecure people, because after all, if you're the king, if everyone knows you're the boss, then what do you have to be afraid of? You're the boss. Like, why should you be insecure about anything? If you're not yet the boss, like some of the characters I just mentioned, these are, this is where your being power hungry comes from. You're often ruthless, brutal, and often resentful. This, again, Richard III is resentful because he gets passed over. He has, again, other people in front of him that he feels he deserves a shot at it. This is Satan in Paradise Lost, right? Like, your resentfulness leads you to demanding power because you feel like you deserve it. Well, that's where, remember the famous line, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Like, that's resentment at its peak, right? You can't fall under the proper order because you think you deserve to be in power. That's the shadow speaking. So again, rather than blessing, you're the one who ignores the worth of other people. You're the person who, if you run the business and it starts having success, like, you're the one who takes all the credit instead of giving credit to your employees. Or you just don't even bother seeing them. You just ignore them entirely. And again, just like the warrior, this is the ultimate bully because you have all the power. You can send people to prison. You can have people executed. You can do all sorts of horrible things. Because of your position, you're the ultimate bully, right? So the opposite of this is, of course, the weakling, which the tyrant usually is weak, just like when we talked about the magician, right? That's the person who tries to appear smarter than they are. Well, the way they're doing that is they're trying to manipulate people usually. So these two things go directly together. The person who's weak is fearful and paranoid, and they often can't handle the leadership and the responsibility. If you've seen Braveheart, these are the exact examples from that movie that William Wallace is fighting against. It's Longshanks. What is it? Edward? I can't remember if it's King Edward, whatever it is. He's like the brutal, mean king of England, and his son is this super wimpy prince guy who is scared to do anything because the king keeps telling him, like, why don't you handle this Wallace guy and get busy creating sons for me, basically, is what he's telling him. And the weak prince can't do it because he's really wimpy. And so these two characters show up in that movie right off the bat. So lots of different characters because this idea of leadership and influencing other people is almost the point of what literature is in the first place. So these characters are everywhere. So what was really interesting, I don't know if you paid much attention to Hollywood this week. Did anyone watch the Oscars on Sunday? Or at least, I'm sure you saw the clip now.
Yeah.
Just the clip? Okay. So I was watching it live. I usually don't watch the Oscars because it's super boring and I can't stand all those people.
So why'd you watch it?
Well, my wife had it on, and so I was tuning into some of it. And there were a couple segments I actually did want to watch. Well, speaking of that, one of the segments I wanted to watch was they did a piece about The Godfather because it's been 50 years since that movie came out. And that's an interesting story because it shows elements of this. And so that's why The Godfather, I think, is such a classic book and film series. The first two are really all that matter. The third one's no good. But is that because The Godfather's like a king figure, right? You're in charge of the family, of the business. And it's a very complicated thing because the Godfather brings order to the family. Like, you're in charge. You set the ground rules for how people should act and what jobs they should do. And the Godfather blesses the people below him. He takes care of people, gives them money, gives them certain positions in his organization. Like, he has the appearance of being a proper king because he actually does both of the good things that you're supposed to do. But the Godfather is also a tyrant, right? If you displease him, he can have you ended quickly. And so I think that's part of why the Godfather is such an interesting American myth is it's a story of acting good in a way that is not good. And that's a really interesting human dichotomy. And so it creates a really interesting story. So I wanted to see how they would talk about that and a couple other movies there were anniversaries of. And so I was just watching, and then we see the chaos emerge, right? And it was such a great example because it really aligned with what we've been talking about. Whatever that 30 seconds was, that is shadow playing itself out in real time. And it's shadow in multiple ways. Okay, if you remember what we've been talking about. Committing violence on people. Warrior shadow, right? Warrior, okay, maybe sometimes you need to be aggressive and defend people physically. Over a joke? No. Not the proper way of using your physicality. All right? That is shadow warrior bully nonsense. Okay? The lover archetype. Remember what his explanation was or what he said afterward? Love can make you do crazy things. I'm just hyper protective. It's like, I love so much that it makes me violent. Yeah, that's what crazy people say. That's shadow archetype right there. Okay? People who truly love don't need to do that. Okay? And then finally, the king, which was so interesting that it played out. He just won his award for a movie called King Richard, which is a sports movie. He's played Muhammad Ali too, so he's been in sports films. And in that movie, the father, he organizes the way for Serena and Venus Williams to become successful. He blesses his family by taking care of them and praising them and all of that. So like there's some good parts. The film is very average and he contradicts himself a lot. So I had a hard time like committing to the film. But Will Smith does a good job. But he clearly didn't learn anything from playing a character, because no king in their right minds would ever act the way he did on that stage that night. That's not what a leader does. Just as comparison, the guy sitting right next to him, Denzel Washington, would have never, ever done that. Because Denzel Washington is a much better role model for, in that world anyway, than Will Smith will ever be. Okay? His actions were the epitome of like beta male trying to act a way that you're trying to convince people you're a tough guy when you aren't, because real tough guys don't do that. No real tough guy needs to go smack someone over a silly, stupid joke. All right? It's funny, I was watching with my wife, and when all this was going down, we're just like, is this real? What's happening right now? And she goes, I would have gotten up and walked out. She goes, first of all, I'm an adult. I can take a joke. I don't need anyone standing up for me over words. That's stupid. And secondly, there's no way I'm going to still sit in that chair after you went and embarrassed yourself in front of billions of people. Right when that happens, I'd be walking out and I'd be like, get away from me for a while. I'm not going to be around you. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what a lady would do. That's why I married her. Okay. The fact that happened, and then apparently she thought that was okay, and then people applauded later for him, and then his insane speech about love and all this craziness, like all of that, hopefully we saw, is all of the dark side of what we've been talking about with characters and with human beings, because none of that is appropriate, and that was not acting in fullness like we have been trying to work on in this class. So a very good example from sort of the story world. I mean, he's an actor, in movies, but also from real life, because all of this is supposed to show up in our real life, and he couldn't handle it. So that's not good. So that's why understanding the shadow is so important, because that's what we want to avoid. So the other thing that's so useful from that incident is because of who was the one speaking to Will Smith. If you're familiar with literature, especially Shakespearean literature, the character of the fool, the jokester, is a really important character. And in, whether it's in King Lear, Twelfth Night, there's a variety of characters throughout Shakespeare's plays that are allowed to speak to the king. And that's what the comedian, Chris Rock, is trying to do. What is the role of the comedian at those events? It's to make fun of everyone, because you're all super rich, powerful people. You deserve to be held in check, right? You're not perfect. You guys do stupid things too. You make bad movies sometimes. You have crazy personal lives. Like, we need to call that out so you don't think too highly of yourself. That's the job of the comedian. It's to do it not in a aggressive way. It's to do it in a joking way, so we all go, yeah, you know what, I'm not perfect. I screw up sometimes too. Okay, fine. And so in Shakespeare's stories, that's what the role of the fool or the trickster or the court jester gets to do. The sign of a true tyrant is someone who doesn't let anyone talk back to them. A true wise king allows people, even if they're critical, to offer the advice. Now, in Shakespeare and in Greek tragedies, in Greek stories with the chorus, it's also to sort of help the audience along, because they're also kind of the conscience of the audience. Because if we see the king acting stupid, all of us in the audience are going, he's going to get in trouble. This isn't going to go well. So that character is sort of a reflection of the audience. But it also proves a really important point, that when you're someone in charge, you have to allow somebody, ideally someone like we talked about last week, who is sort of in the magician archetype, like someone wise and who knows things and can see things differently than you and can give you insight and wisdom, like a counselor, mentor, someone like that. But at minimum, and this is tough, but you have to allow people to poke fun at you, because if you think you're so far above being made fun of, you're on the road to being a tyrant, right? And that's exactly what happened when Will Smith thought he should go up and smack down the jokester. So that situation was so indicative of literature because the comedian's job is to be the person who speaks the truth to powerful people, to keep them in check so that they don't become too powerful and they take advantage of their power. Will Smith took advantage of his power. He's a big guy. He's super wealthy and powerful. He walked up on the stage and hit a smaller person for making a joke. Well, that's...
And then walked away.
And then walked away. And then, worse yet, one, didn't apologize to him in his little speech. And even worse yet, again, the ultimate beta move, posted an apology on Instagram. Lame. Okay? Scripture is very clear. When you make a mistake, what do? You go to the person. You do it in private. He never did, at least not that we know of. He'd say he had his publicist probably posted on Instagram thinking, oh, this is my apology. No. So even in, we've been talking about our archetypes, but even the archetype, I didn't include that in our discussion here, but the archetype of the comedian, the jokester, the fool, that character is in Shakespearean or Greek stories for a reason. Their job is to tell things that are edgy and truthful to keep people in check, and it exposes people who can't take it. If you can't take a joke, you are a tyrant. So that's what we learned from the Oscars the other night. Oh yeah, you want to talk about the warrior motif in that? It was actually Chris Rock. The fact that now, Will Smith's a lot bigger than him, so maybe he doesn't want to mess with him, but like the fact that he took it and stood there, remember the warrior archetype is you fulfill your duty. His job was to go up there, crack a few jokes, and present. And he did. Without fighting back. He did his job. Like, pretty impressive. Even beyond that, from the other night, all that overshadows, if you saw the clip of Lady Gaga, who, she's a crazy person, but like, I mean, look, some of her songs are nuts and the way she dresses, but like, the way she acted at the end of the ceremony was pretty amazing. She showed the love archetype in a brilliant way by taking care of Liza Minnelli, who's super old and disabled now. Like, she comforted her and showed amazing compassion in a stressful moment where you're on, in front of thousands of people in the audience and millions worldwide. She was so graceful in a very awkward situation. I was very impressed. So again,
So what happened? I didn't see it.
well, she was presenting the Best Picture, and Liza Minnelli, you could tell, is not quite fully there. I don't know if she's having age-related mental problems or what. She's in a wheelchair, so there's some disabilities going on, and you could tell like she doesn't exactly know what's going on. And Lady Gaga is very kind in guiding her through the process on stage in front of all these people in a very stressful situation. So, like, great examples of real compassion and care for people. Real examples of restraint on Chris Rock's part for not retaliating or making the situation worse. He diffused it, did his duty, carried on with the ceremony. And then, like I said, other people, Denzel Washington, we heard, like, tried to bring some peace to the situation and wisdom. Like, there were great examples of being pretty close to being in fullness, and yet the thing that we all noticed was the person acting in the shadow character. So that was a very interesting thing to keep track of from a literary and psychological standpoint. All right. So let's talk about some of the things we read or looked at for tonight, and then I'm going to show you an example of what it really means to be someone who has the ultimate respect and authority and yet lived his life blessing other people. So that's what we'll talk about next.